How Psalm 139 ends is in so many ways as important and significant as all that we've seen so far in the first three stanzas of this psalm. David the psalmist has been worshipping the God who is in verses 1 to 6 all-knowing, 7 to 12 all-present, and 13 to 18 all-powerful. And in each case, we've seen a little of David's response to the revealed divine reality. But what we have in this closing stanza is the right and fitting way to respond to such profound and glorious theology. Friends, theology or spiritual and doctrinal truth is not meant simply to fill our heads and our minds with facts, however true and wonderful they may be. It is intended to elicit from the depths of our beings a response of worship and adoration, not to mention obedience. In the pre-COVID days at college, when I taught systematic theology to a class of students in person, rather than is so often the case now online, we would close each class with a hymn in which we could take back to God in praise our heartfelt worship for the truths we had been considering. I need to stress, by the way, that idea is not original to me. I don't claim credit for it, but I got it from Wayne Grudem's systematic theology, which is structured in that very helpful way. So in this psalm, having reflected on God's omniscience, his omnipresence, and his omnipotence, David then prays. First of all, in verses 19 to 22, he prays that God would slay the wicked, who he describes as men of blood, and who he professes to hate and to loathe. Wow, strong words of worship. But that's exactly what they are, words of worship. Why? Well, because they're motivated by a holy jealousy for God, in the light of men and women who despise and reject not some tin pot deity, not some idol which is the figment of their perverted imagination, but the incomparable, transcendent and holy, omniscient, omnipresent and omnipotent God. These people that David has in mind speak against God with malicious intent, he says. They take his name in vain. They hate God and rise up against him. How, asked David, how could I be friends with people who so hate my God? After all, surely the enemies of my dearest friend are my enemies also. In fact, I could use a much weaker parallel by way of illustration. Would we not naturally feel that same loathing and revulsion towards anyone who mistreated perhaps our wife or our husband or child or someone dear and close to us? Why then should we be surprised and shocked when David expresses those feelings towards those who so vilely treat the all-glorious God that he has just been exalting in for the last 18 verses of this psalm? So David prays that God would slay the wicked. And then he prays that God would search his own heart in verses 23 and 24. So closing the psalm on precisely the note on which he began it. Now I want to suggest that behind David's prayer lie two motivations. The first is in light of what he has just prayed. And I suspect that David is praying that God might search him out to ensure that his motivation in praying for the slaying of the wicked is pure and holy and not driven by some sinful desire for revenge or whatever. And secondly, David is praying in the light of God's omniscience, which actually really underpins both his omnipresence and his omnipotence. And since God knows everything about me, every secret place and thought, every nook and cranny of my being, then I need to make sure that there is no unconfessed or unrepented of sin in my life. David doesn't just recognize the sins in others. That's relatively easy for us to do. He also isn't kidding himself about the natural sinful disposition of his own heart. And friends, neither should we.